Thank you very much. Very nice introduction. In any case, I was here in 1971, and I have an arrow pointed to where I was. Star Island was indeed my home. Appledore at that point was nothing more than a guano pit that we visited on occasion. There we go. So my topic was Isles of the Shoals as an improbable shark nursery. And for those of you that are biologists, pardon this definition, but for those of you that are naturalists in general or not inclined towards the definitions of science, a nursery is a subset of all animals where juveniles of a species occur, having a greater level of productivity per unit area than other juvenile habitats. Now, all of us have been out to the Isles of the Shoals, and as part of our work, we no doubt got to go out on a fishing boat. And one notices that the relatives of sharks, the skates and rays, in this case in particular the skates, are particularly numerous in the Gulf of Maine. And you often will pick up 3 species in a single haul, like on that sort of red background slide. There's 3 different species there. Among those are the winter skate and the little skate, which you really wouldn't be able to identify very readily unless you've taken an ichthyology class, because they look a lot alike. There are other species out here in some abundance, including the thorny skate, the smooth skate, and the barn door skate. So the biodiversity is great. There's other species here as well. And they all share the same reproductive mode, which is the female lays their young in egg cases, and those young are just basically a glob of yolk when they get put in the egg case, and then many months later they begin to hatch. It's fully developed young, and in the center we see a little skate embryo beginning to emerge after its months of growth within the egg case. So skates obviously use this area as a nursery, but my title was Shark Nursery. And realistically, the only shark that you really see in abundance around the Isles of the Shoals is the spiny dogfish. Now, among shark people, it's almost not a shark because it doesn't even get called shark. It's a spiny dogfish. Well, it is a shark, and its mode of reproduction is different from that of the skates and rays. The female carries the young. In this case, the young, a couple on the bottom left there that have been unceremoniously removed from a mom, are not fully developed at this point. They can see the big yolk sac, which they develop using for nourishment. And eventually they pop out of mom as a little miniature adult, and they're on their own. And in fact, this area is a nursery area for the spiny dogfish. Unfortunately, this is a very popular fish in fisheries. And if we look at the population sizes of these critters, from, let me read myself in the fine print, 1920 on the far left, all the way to about 2004 on the far right, you can see the populations have gone up and then remarkably gone down, the result of overfishing. And so this very abundant and improbably named shark is in fact in some trouble here and now wholly dependent on fishery regulation. To be absolutely honest with everybody here, there are a couple of the sharks that make the area. The basking shark, who is the second largest shark in the world, reaching more than 30 feet in length, a plankton feeder. You can the plankton that Jen was talking about happily go down the gullet of this animal, and lots of it do to make it that big. Usually seen at the water surface, as in the bottom photograph, and I get lots of calls from people saying, I got this picture of these 3 sharks swimming in a daisy chain. And inevitably it's a basking shark, like the bottom photograph, where the nose is popping out of the water, then there's the dorsal fin, and then at the very left, the tip of the tail. And amazingly, these animals swim in daisy chains all the time in big circles, and of course everybody's quick to say that they're white sharks, 3 of them out to get us. The other species of shark that's found in some degree of certainty in the area is the thresher shark, a species that's characterized by having a very long upper caudal lobe, which it uses as a mechanism to gather its prey. It finds a school of fish, makes a big circle around it, and then takes that big tail and slaps it, beats the hell out of the fish, and of course they're stunned, and it comes back around and it grabs them. So that's how it gets its prey so readily. It's also how it gets caught on long lines, fishing gear that the fishermen use, because it'll do the same thing to a bait on a long line. And so most thresher sharks that are caught in long line gear are what the fishermen call tail hooked. The hook goes through the tail because they slap the hook so hard that it goes through the tail to get pulled in that way. These have an interesting reproductive cycle because they're also internal fertilizers, and the young are maturing in mom. But only 2 come out of each uterus. And there's 2 uteri in the sharks, in this particular shark, and so there's only 1. In this case, there's 2, and only 2 develop, 2 per side. And this is largely a result of how much room there is in mom to allow for the number of young. And these come out quite large. These 4 are about 1.5 meters long, and were taken out of mom in Florida, and that means they weren't quite ready to be born yet, so they're quite large. So, getting back to the shoals. Perry Gilbert, a wonderful man, one of the founders of the lab, one of 6 founders, right? That's what I read online anyway. See, I did a little homework. Yeah, you can't always believe what you read on the internet, but I imagine this part is true. One of the founders of the lab, and in 1971 came and gave a wonderful lecture on sharks during my stay there. And then subsequent to that, had a dual relationship where he went down to a place called Shoals Marine Laboratory in Sarasota, Florida. And he served as director for that laboratory for many years, and there was a symbiotic relationship between Cornell, that laboratory, and of course the Shoals Laboratory. At Moat, he interacted a lot with Jeannie Clark. Jeannie Clark was the sort of the woman shark scientist of her era, one of the best shark scientists out there, and was unique because she was a she in the 1950s. There just simply weren't very many women in shark science, and so she was unique among that, and deserves a tremendous amount of credit for breaking that all-boys club. Perry was a very good shark biologist. His forte was reproductive biology. He published many papers on shark reproduction, and coming into the lab in 1971, I was aware of his work and had done a little homework. And that day, we didn't have the internet then, so I actually had to go to that big building with brick with all those books in it and look things up. But I figured out some of the things he had done. And of course, he was best known for the 2 volumes on the left, which he edited, which were the results of 2 major symposia on sharks in the 1950s. And they were published as 2 volumes, one called Sharks and Survival, the other Sharks, Gates, and Rays. And they're still working those volumes, and are still seminal and very relevant today. We were a couple grad students when we were down there when I was there. One of them was Rick Martini, the fellow on the left. He was a grad student of Perry's, and he worked on physiology of sharks. And because I was interested in sharks, I got to talk to Rick a lot. And he made a great impression upon me. We talked about how people make impressions. Well, he made an impression on me. He did physiology of sharks. After talking to him, I said, no way in the world am I going to be a physiologist. Not excited. That's not my gig. So it works both ways, of course. The other guy was John JD Heiser. And JB was, JB, believe it or not, was my roommate on Star Island. And As you can see, he was pretty hairy back then. Remember, this was 1968, and I was probably pretty hairy too. But it turned out to be a great match because JB was studying the systematics of reef fishes at the time for his PhD at Cornell. He worked on the wrasse genus Thalassoma, and turned out to be his one and only foray into systematics. I guess after he finished his degree, he decided I've had enough of this too, and then decided to become the second director of the Shoals lab. And of course, he has a beautiful boat named after him as well. Now, Perry Gilbert, one of his accomplishments that I was well aware of when I first met him here was he had established a thing called the Shark Attack File. And this was funded by the Office of Naval Research in the 1950s. The premise being that the Navy had a lot of people on boats and airplanes that went down into the sea. Those sailors and aviators didn't really want to meet a shark. And this goes back to World War II, where the Navy had tried to support research to get an anti-shark measure. And so in the 1950s, Perry, being the clever guy that he was, he played that shark attack card into a big funding program for all shark research, which was a real forte. That said, Perry published some papers on shark attack as part of his gig, and they were co-authored with Leonard Schultz from the Smithsonian Institution, the co-founder of the file, and another guy by the name of Stewart Springer, who was a longtime friend of Perry's. Stu Springer was a seat-of-the-pants biologist, a guy who did not get his bachelor's degree until he was 55 years old. He went back to school at 55 to get a bachelor's degree simply because he was about to be promoted to be the director of the Bureau of Commercial Fisheries, and they couldn't promote him without a degree. So he scooted out a degree at that age after having published probably a couple hundred papers by then. A real seat-of-the-pants guy. He turned out to be my mentor. Stewart Springer retired in Florida and eventually moved to Gainesville, where I live. And we spent the last 15 years of his life talking sharks every day after work, usually over martinis. And I owe whatever I know about sharks basically to Stu. Stu was involved with the commercial shark fishery in Florida from the 1930s to the early 1950s. And in that era, the sharks were being captured primarily for their livers. And there's a liver being taken out of that big bull shark, or big tiger shark there. And that was turned into vitamin A, which was very important, of course, as a vitamin. And it continued until the early 50s when synthesis of vitamin A occurred. And suddenly it wasn't so important to catch shark livers because everybody could get them cheaper from the synthetic. Later on, in the late 1980s, a commercial shark fishery reestablished itself in Florida and throughout the southeastern United States. And I got involved with that in starting up a shark fishery observer program where we sent observers to sea aboard the commercial vessels to record what they're catching and to begin the management process for these animals. Now, Stu Springer's partner in the fishery was a man named Bobby Dorian. Bobby was a well-educated man from Dartmouth who was an entrepreneur by profession, a venture capitalist. And according to Bobby, the most important thing in life, he would tell me over and over again, was networking. And he said, if you network, you can move ahead in anything. And of course, I'm not a businessman, but I did have to run a business, a laboratory in the sense of getting funding. So I appreciated any advice he could give us on that sort of thing. And Wolf, what happened here? All right, we seem to have lost a screen or two. Oh, there it comes. Okay, and that eventually led, thank you, eventually led to a nice, very nice donation from Mr. Dorian and it was named the Dorian Springer Professorship at the University of Florida, which supported the development of a shark program under my care. Now, back to Shoals. I'm going to talk about a couple other people who really touched me personally while I was here. Ollie Hewitt was probably the first and foremost guy of all, an ornithologist at Cornell, also a co-founder of this operation. He, upon his retirement, moved out to Florida, where he hooked up again with Perry at the Marine Lab as an emeritus sort of person. But while here, his love of birds, and very specifically the gulls, the blackback and the herring gulls on Appledore, where we visited only to get our feet smelly, really rubbed off on me. And I've been an avid bird watcher ever since. Ollie had one special trait that really sunk in on my career and my life. And with all due respect to Dr. Kingsbury, I'm going to reveal something that you may or may not have known back in 1971. Seems that Star Island at that time was operated as a religious retreat, and no alcohol was allowed on that island. We, being the innovative group that we were as students, figured out a way to change that. There was some construction going on the island, and with flashing a few $20 bills, we were able to get the construction workers to make a run for us to the coastline. And there in the middle of the night, just like the old rum runners used to do, we unloaded a boat over the rocks in the Ascapillum nodosa, and slipping and sliding, had alcohol for the rest of our time, which we would wait until the lights would go out, which was 9 o'clock when the generator was shut down, and then the drinking would start. Of the faculty members that were there, only one Dr. Hewitt would come down and visit us at that time because he wanted to imbibe with us. And in fact, he was a regular nighttime visitor. And the part that was important was we talked biology, we talked birds, we talked fish, we talked wildlife experiences each and every night with a beer in the hand and Ollie on the bed next to us. So I'm sorry, Dr. Kingsbury, we broke some rules, but we all came out better for it, I think.
I should say that this was not disallowed, really.
Well, if we known if we knew you were interested, we would have invited you. This coming from the man who every morning would come around with a big bell, ringing it and saying, 6 o'clock on the kitchen clock, time to wake up. And so we didn't invite you, I'm sorry. Another person who was there that was very meaningful to me was John Anderson. John Anderson, a classy guy from top to bottom, an ex-Navy guy, quiet. Every time he said something, you listened because it was well thought out. He studied starfish, including this particular starfish, the food habits of starfish. He also visited Mote Marine Lab during the summers on occasion to do work on this particular species. As John was leaving back from the coast during the middle of the course, he pulled me aside, and keep in mind I came into this course as an invertebrate guy to be. I came in between my junior and senior years in college, and I was being set up to be an invert guy by my invert professor at the University of Rhode Island, a guy named Don Zinn, who was a very good teacher. And so I was here at his suggestion to polish me up and get me ready for grad school. Well, John says to me as I'm leaving, very quiet, he pulls me and he said, you don't always have to swing for the fences. And I think you can probably gather from my conversation here that I'm a guy who tends to swing for the fences. And so those words were very good because it taught me sometimes it's better to look for a quieter way to do something, try to work within the system a little bit more, and that's helped me out a lot during my years. Getting back to Perry, just a heck of a nice guy. Anybody that knew Perry knows he was a gentleman's gentleman, as good a guy as you could be, and deserves all the honors that were bestowed upon him. One of those was, I think appropriately, my buddy Stewart Springer and I described a new species of shark and gave it a name for him, Edmopterus perryi. Edmopterus perryi turns out to be it's called the dwarf lantern shark. It's a deep sea shark that makes its own light. It's bioluminescent, and it turns out to be the world's smallest shark. So I think it's kind of ironic that Perry Gilbert, a giant in his field, in fact has the smallest known shark named after him. So I was going to say we're going to have a quiz on all this. And so I made a little flow diagram, which I'm prone to do with talking ecological matters. And so here are all the people and the names of the things that we've done over the years. And please pull out a piece of paper and a pencil, and we're going to have a little quiz. So, getting back to the title of the Shoals Lab being a shark nursery, I would say, in fact, it wasn't just a shark nursery, it was a nursery in general. And that old hotel had me as one of its neonates for 1 year, and hundreds of others there in Appledore have used the Shoals Labs as a nursery. Thanks very much.